So let's set up the interface. I'm going to create a I'm going to create a new canvas here, UI panel, let's say, and this is going to be our inventory panel, I guess. An inventory panel should obviously have a title to let the user know that they're on the inventory. So I'm going to unlock my inspector there. Panel, let's give this a nice brown, I guess, color. Give me some more alpha. There we go. Yeah, that'll do. And then I want this to be in the center of my screen. Width, let's give it a width of 500. Yeah, that'll do. And then height of 500 as well. Yeah, that's fine. Again, you can design this user interface however you want to make it look. I kind of want to give it a blue, not gonna lie. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, title, this should say inventory. Now the title will be displayed across the top, so I'm going to hold Alt and Shift so that the anchor point and everything else is selected as well. That's fine there. Center, aligned by geometry, best fits, color should be white, and font you can set to whatever you want to set. Bold text, that's fine. Height, let's increase it a little bit, like so. Beautiful. Now we have nice inventory text there. Now, there's one thing that this inventory is obviously missing, and that's some slots. So I'm going to create a slot prefab. And some of you will see this happen, me do this in the, what's it called? The 2D Sandbox series. So I'm going to create a panel again. And it's going to be slot. I'll call it slot panel, I guess. Cool. We'll make this darker. Set this up to the center. Width would be, let's say, 60, I guess, and height 60 as well. And this is just going to be set up just like any other grid sort of inventory, you know, like Minecraft, Terraria, or whatever. You know, basically exact same thing. So UI image goes underneath the slot. Make sure you hold Shift and Alt and set this image to scale. I'm going to give it a padding of 5 from every side. Yeah, that'll be fine. And you can test this just by adding any item into it. That's how it's going to look. Beautiful. Let's do that. Cool. And that's our first slot done. I'm going to create a prefab of it by dragging and dropping it into the assets folder. And now we have a slot panel prefab. Beautiful. Now, one thing obviously is that one slot is not enough for our inventory. So I'm going to create an empty object underneath our inventory panel. And this is just going to be called slots. And this is just going to hold all the slots in our inventory. So I'm going to drag and drop our slots onto it there. Cool. So let's create a few more slots just by doing Control D, duplicating it. Position should be 60, and that will put it right next to it, but I want some padding in between them, so I'm just going to +5 next to it as well. Now I can duplicate another one and say -65, and that will put it right in the center here with the other slot, and then if I say -65 again, it will put it next to it. So I'm going to move these all up as well to, let's say, 65. Yeah, that'll do. I might put another slot on either side. So again, say -65 on this one, and then duplicate this one and say +65 on this one. And I'm just setting this up for, you know, the purposes of this tutorial. You can make this look actually nice. Ignore these white squares. We're going to set that up in just a sec. Duplicate all of these by selecting them all and doing Control D. Pause Y, we're going to now set to 0. Now select all of these again. Control D, and I'm going to say -65. And there we go. We have some slots of our inventory set up. Now you can add as many as you want doing the same methods. Set this up however you want. You know, this is, again, like I said, purposes for the tutorial. Now, inventory manager should keep track of where all our slots are stored in the scene view. So I'm going to have a public game object slots. In fact, for the purposes of making this, you know, actually good code, I'm going to make this serialized field, all of these public functions, so serialized field and private. Serialized field and where is it? Serialized field and then private. And I'm going to do the same for this one, serialized field, private. The reason that's important is because you don't actually want these things to be public. They're not being accessible via other scripts, but you want them to be visible in the inspector. So we add serialized fields and they're a private variable. And that means show them in the Unity inspector, but I'm not going to use them anywhere else. So with that set up, let's call this slot holder. There we go. And then I want a private game object list or game object array called let's call this slots. And this is just going to keep the game object of every slot. It allows us to add and remove things a lot easier. So let's set that what we've done so far in the inspector. So if I click on the inventory, you'll see that we have a slot holder object now. I'm just going to drag and drop the slots object. Cool. With that done, now we can access all these slots. So I can say slots equals new game object array, and the size is going to be slot holder dot get child dot transform dot child count. There you go. So there we go. That's fine. And then we want to obviously set all the slots. And that way, the way I'm going to do it is for each. Actually, this could be a lot easier if I just do a list, I think. That said, it is an array. Yeah, we'll do an array. Yeah, let's do an array. Because one thing actually is that I set this up incorrectly over here. Because I'd want the first slot in the slots panel. If I open this up, the first slot is actually in the center here, which is not how I'd want it to be. I want the first slot to be this one. So what I'm going to do really quick is rearrange my slots here so that it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That way, when I add an item, it can easily go to the first one, then the second one, and all that. So I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll be right back. So I'm going to chop this bit out. Okay, so I've rearranged these, so now it goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I can duplicate these and do the same thing I did before just by saying 0, duplicate these again and saying -65. That way, when I go down all of these, it should just go down. Oh, these ones are a bit messed up here. Did I do something wrong? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. This should be there. Not there. So now 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay. Cool. That's fine. That's set up. So that's the most important thing you want to think about when setting up your inventory. You want to make sure your first slot is they go in order in which the slots are going to be filled up. If that makes sense. So with that set up, now I can again go back into our code and say for each. Well, I'll say for int I equals 0. I less than slots dot child count, slots dot transform dot slots dot transform. Wait, slot holder. That's the one. Slot holder dot transform dot child count. There we go. And then I plus plus. And what it's going to do is say slots I equals slot holder dot transform dot get child I dot game object. Cool, and I don't actually need these extra brackets here. That's fine for us. Cool, and that's just going to mean that now we have all the slots in there stored here. So now I'm going to have a refresh function. So this is a public void, which is going to refresh user interface. It doesn't need any parameters. That's fine. And this function is going to be called every single time we add an item. So I'm going to say refresh user interface. And every time we remove an item, refresh UI. Cool. And I'm also going to call it just before we add. Well, I don't have to call it after this. But yeah, so after we initialize all our slots, I want to say refresh user interface just because now we've started. So what this is going to do is look through every single item in our inventory and determine yeah, determine if it is what's it called, has an item there or not has an item. If it has an item, then we're going to set its image. So it's a bit confusing to explain, but I'm going to show you guys what I mean right now. So it's going to look through each slot game object. One thing I do need to add here is using Unity Engine. Unity Engine.ui. There we go. That means now I can access the image components and stuff on the slots. So now I want to say for each game object slots in, yeah, for each game in slots, that makes sense. There we go. Now I want to say slot.transform.getChild, and remember that's how we set up our slot. So each slot, if Unity loads, each slot here, its first child is an image, and we're going to set the image here. So in fact, I should probably make this a counter loop. Yeah, okay, so I'll say for int I, just like this one again, I equals 0, I less than slots.length I plus plus. Now I can say slots i.transform.getChild 0.getComponents image equals, and it's going to equal items i.item icon. Beautiful. Dot sprite, that's the one. Okay, so it's going to set the sprite equal to the item icon. Now, what happens if we don't have enough items here? So that's going to give us an error, obviously. Now, the way I'm going to do that is just by saying, instead of looping through each slot, well, actually, I should loop through each slot, right? And then I should try this, okay? Now, if successful, it's just going to set the item icon. If it fails, it's going to catch an error exception, and instead of, you know, stopping everything, it's just going to say, okay, there was an error, okay? Now, the error could be one of two things. Either there's no item in that slot, or it's out of the index range. So we're going to be able to fix both with just one line, and that's just by saying slot either turn the sprite equals null. There's no item there. And we also just want to say .image.enabled equals false. That's just going to get rid of that white square that likes to appear. And I'm going to say here .equals true. So just in case it was disabled, now we want to enable. Okay. And basically, I think if I've done that right, that should mean that we should see all our items here refresh. So let's press play and see which errors we get or don't get. There we go. As you can see now, our inventory, it's got a whole bunch of empty slots, and it's got coal and apple in the first two slots. Okay, so now if I want to add apple again, I don't actually have a way of refreshing user interface. So I should do that as well. Let's add another sword, and then we'll add two swords. Let's press play, and then we should see a few swords as well as, no, there we go. Perfect. So it's added an apple, removed this initial sword. That's great. So now we have a way of storing items. So perfect. We're one step closer. And now, what happens if we want to store two apples in the same inventory? Not that one. Apple. There we go. So what will happen at the moment is for that add function, we'll just add it to the end, and then, you know, that's fine. Now that's one way of setting up your inventory. However, in most cases, you want these items to stack in your user interface. So I'm going to set that up now. So each slot should obviously have, if I open the slot here, there we go, it'll have an image as the first child, and then the second child will be a UI text. and this text is going to be quantity. And then I can set this to be just the bottom here. There we go. We'll do that. That's fine. Width and height both should be 30. There we go. And then this is just going to be a quantity here. Set it to the bottom corner. Color can be white. Best fit, go for it. Align by geometry, yes. And it can be bold font. Cool. Now, question is, why is this? Why is that moving? Stop moving. Right. Maybe that's why. No. Huh? Okay. Well, it doesn't want to work for me. That is fine. Since I've applied that to the slot, though, they should all now have quantity text. So if I press play, they'll all say quantity 0. Beautiful. And again, you can set this user interface however you want to set up. I'm literally just doing it for the purposes of a tutorial. Now, so slots I equals this, and then we also want to set the image. So slots there got dot child dot text dot text will equal 0. Let's say for now. And then in another case, it will just say there's no item there, so set the text equal to nothing. And that will be fine there. So now if I press play, every slot that has an item will display 0. Every slot that doesn't have an item will display 0. Oh, sorry, nothing. My brain, it's turning off. So let's press play. Beautiful. That is working nice. So the only issue now is that we don't have a way of tracking, you know, which item has which slot has how many items in it, etc. So I'm going to create a new C# script and call this slot class. Now, a slot class is going to be just its own class. It's not going to inherit anything like the other classes did. So let's open up slot class. This is not going to be a mono behavior class. It's not going to be this. It's just going to be literally some data. So it's going to have a private, private. Let's say private item class, item, and then it will have a private int quantity. Now, we're going to need to create a constructor for this class. So I'm going to have a public slot class, and this constructor is going to take in an item class underscore item and a int underscore quantity, just like so. And that way I can say item equals underscore item, and then quantity equals underscore quantity. So now we need to create some getters and setters for this. There is a shortcut to do so, but I'm going to show you guys the manual way because it's fun. Not really, but we'll just bear with the manual way for now to avoid some confusion. So I can say a public item class get item, and this is pretty much the exact same as the other item class scripts here. It's just going to return item instead. There we go. And then I'm going to have a public int get quantity. There we go. And it's going to return, you guessed it, quantity. Beautiful. All right, cool. That is literally set up. That's our slot class. So now instead of having a instead of our inventory having a list of items, right? Our inventory is going to have a list of slot classes. So change it from item class to slot class. There we go. That will mean the current items we have set up won't obviously work. So what I might actually do is maybe I should make this serializable. For the purposes of the tutorial, I'm going to make this system.serializable. You should not add this because you should be, you know, I mean, technically, I guess you can. Yeah, you know what? Just add it if you want to add it. Realistically, this should be managed via your code entirely. And I'm going to show you how to do so in literally now. So now our add Now, obviously, this is going to give us some errors. I'm going to just comment these out for now. And you'll see that this line also gives us an error. So now slots dot sprite blah 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 is now going to equal items dot get item dot where is it, item icon. Now when it comes to Unity, technically you don't need getters and setters like this. Technically you can just make this public. However, when it comes to general programming practice, you should be using getters and setters like so. You shouldn't have all these public variables and stuff. In fact, you should technically do the same for, you know, this as well. For example, public tool type, you should have this as a getter and a setter, etc. So for our setter, we don't need it. We have a constructor that will do. But yeah, that's just some information for you guys who care, which is probably not a lot of you, but that's fine. And now our text is going to equal items I dot get quantity. There we go. This should also be .toString as well. In fact, rather than doing toString, I'm just going to add an empty string to the end of it, like so, because I can't. So either or will work. But yeah, so that's fine. Now add function won't work anymore. That's also fine. Our start function will also be a bit broken, but that's fine. We're going to fix all that now. So our add function, first it should check the entire inventory to make sure that no other slot contains that item. So check if inventory contains item. Now I could program this into here, hard-coded. However, a better efficient method and a more flexible method would be to just create a public bool. In fact, it would probably be a better method, even more, would be to do this. So we're gonna have a contains function which returns the slot class which contains that item. So that way, if we wanted to add it to it, we can just increase the quantity of that slot class. If there is no slot class, if it returns null, then that means the item is not contained. Therefore, the inventory doesn't contain the item. So this is going to say contains, and this will take it in an item class item, and this is where our code is going to go. So now I'm going to say return null at the end, like that. And then here we're going to do a loop. We're going to loop through our entire inventory again. So I can say we're going to do a simple pattern here. So slots, in fact, I might do this for each loop, for each loop, for each slot class in items, I think. Is that right? For each slot class in items, yes. For each slot class slot in items, if slots.get item is equal to item, then return slot. And that's it. That's our contains function. So now I can say check if inventory contains item. If contains item, the inventory contains the item. I can say, well, what I should say is actually slot class slots equals contains item. And then if slot is not equal to null, that means the inventory contains the item. I can say slot.get quantity. And for this, I will need to do a setter. So I'm going to have a public void set quantity. Or rather, I will have a add quantity function. And this will take in an int quantity. We'll do underscore quantity again. And what this is going to do is literally say quantity plus equals quantity. Plus equals underscore quantity. Like that. That's our setter or, you know, function there. So that way in the inventory manager, I can say slot dot add quantity, and I can just add 1. There we go. Now, in the case where our inventory does not contain that item, what I need to do is a little bit more complicated. I need to say items.add. And here I'm going to create a new slot class, and this is going to now utilize our constructor, which we wrote here. So now we're going to create a new slot class using this function, or constructor rather, and it's going to take in an item and then a quantity. Our quantity, since we're only adding 1, is just going to be 1, like that. And that's our function there. Beautiful. So now our remove function again is a little bit more complicated. This time it's gonna go through each slot and compare items instead of just using the contains function or the inbuilt remove function. There we go. So for each slot in items, if slot dot get item, yes, if slot dot get item is equal to item, then slots items dot remove slot, and then I should also break, because I don't want to keep doing the loop. Now this is not a good practice to do in reality, because you don't want to remove something from the list while you're looping through that list. Not a good idea. So what we should do is similar to this, create a temporary slot class slot. It can be stateless for the moment. In fact, I'll just say slot to remove. Now, if slot dot get item is equal to item, then I want to say slot to remove equals slots. So now we're setting that slot to that slots, and then I can say items dot remove, and I can remove slot to remove. That's giving me an error. Use of unassigned. Okay, that's fine. What I shall do is have a empty constructor here, like so. So what that means is basically that we can create a slot class from nothing, and it's just going to say item equal to null and quantity equal to 0. And that means now that we have a constructor for that, I can say equals new slot class without giving any parameters, because, you know, we don't need to. We're using the other constructor this time, and then that way it has a state. We can remove it, and that will be fine there. Beautiful. Okay. So I think with all that set up, that should actually work perfectly in theory. One thing I do need to do is go back into our inventory manager, and you'll see that the UI here is a little bit different. We now have element 0, element blah, 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 and so on. So I'm going to delete all of these for now. Put this to there. Cool. Add. Now, one problem is that our slot class, since these are private, we can't see this in the inspector. So I'm going to set these to serialized field as well, like so. And that way you'll see that element 0 now has some data we can edit on it, which is perfect. There we go. Now has a drop down, and we can set the item and the quantity. So for example, I want to add an sword of quantity 1, and then an apple, let's say, apple of quantity 5. And one thing I just realized I forgot to do, and I'll explain it in just a sec, is that the remove function, one thing that it's not taking into account is if the inventory contains that item, right? So our remove function should actually do this bit as well, just like so. Okay, so it should say slot class slot. I'll just call this temp for now. There you go. And its code looks a bit messy at the moment, but I'm going to explain what it does in just a sec. I'll add another bracket here just to avoid confusion in the layout. Okay, cool. So if it contains, then temp.add quantity. I also spelled quantity wrong here. Let's fix that up real quick. There we go. I also want another function called remove, or I'll say sub quantity, which of course says quantity minus equals quantity this time. And that basically means that if we already contain that item in our inventory, instead of deleting that item from pure existence, just subtract 1 from the item. Otherwise, we don't contain an item in our inventory. In which case, well, here's the thing. We want to remove 1 from its quantity if its quantity is greater than 1. So if temp.getQuantity is greater than 1 or greater than equal to 1. Is that right? If it's greater than 1, so it's 2, then there's that. Otherwise it's 1. Okay, yeah. So if it's greater than 1, subtract 1 from its quantity. Otherwise, that's when we want to do this. Like that. Cool. So there we go. Otherwise, we don't have that item in our inventory anyway. So, you know, we don't need to do anything. One thing I do actually want to do is change this from a void to a bool so that we can keep track of if we successfully removed the item from our inventory or not. That way I can also say refresh UI return true. And then here I can say return false, which basically return false will exit this function. No need to refresh the UI because nothing changed in our inventory anyway. We didn't contain the item. We're not gonna, that saves us from getting a null reference as well. So basically just by doing that little change, fixes basically everything. So now let's look at what our inventory contains at the start. It contains 1 sword, 5 apples, and 10 coal. We're going to add another apple. So once we press play, we should have 6 apples. And then we're going to remove 1 sword. Okay. And one thing I will also, we'll test this. And then I'll also test it by removing, setting the quantity of sword to 2. And then we'll test it and see if that changes. So let's just press play. Okay. So I have 6 apples, 10 coal, and no swords. Beautiful. That worked. Cool. So now let's say set the quantity of sword to 3. We're meant to have 3 swords. And now we subtracted a sword, so we have 2 swords left. So that works like a charm. Perfect. So here's another thing we want to think about. Let's say we want to add 2 swords to our inventory, right? We don't want the swords to stack. So each item class should actually have a function or a public bool to say is stackable. And this is going to say, like, if it can be stacked, then obviously add to it. Otherwise, if we can't stack items, then, you know, we don't want to stack them. We don't want the number to increase. We just want that we just want that number to stay the same and add it to the end of the list. So one thing I'm going to really quickly do is tick this is stackable on the sword. Beautiful. In our inventory manager, when we add what is it? Here we go. Yeah. So when we say public void add, I'm going to make this a boolean as well, and it will return true here. To say yes, we've successfully added the item. 2 things we have to really quickly do. I have to get the max capacity of the inventory because we don't want to add anything to the inventory if, you know, we're below max capacity. So if the let's see here. So if our inventory contains the item already, go to that slot and add 1 to the quantity of that slot. Otherwise, we don't contain it already. Check, do we have enough space in our inventory? So if items.count is less than slots.length, right? That means we have enough space in our inventory. So add it. Otherwise, we don't have enough space in our inventory, so return false. We went unsuccessfully. We were unsuccessful to add that item to our inventory. Okay. Another thing we want to do is check if slot is not equal to null and slot.getItem dot is stackable. So only if it's stackable do we want to add one to the quantity. Otherwise, we just want to add it just like any other item. Refresh the UI, return true, blah, blah, blah. That's all fine. So now if I go to our inventory script, I want to say instead of adding an apple, I'm going to add a sword. So now we should see two swords appear in our user interface separately. They did not appear separately. They have stacked, which is interesting to see. Actually, never mind. Here we go. Wait, let me make that quantity of 1. Okay, so we have 1 sword. So interestingly, we also didn't add it to the end of the list. I'm being very stupid, aren't I? Our item class should say is stackable equals true by default. And I realized that I've made it so that every item is unstackable except the sword. So is stackable is true, apple is stackable is true, sword is stackable is false. Okay, let's press play and see if that works. Okay, so now we have sword at the end. I'm thinking we're meant to have one at the start as well, aren't we? Apple, sword at the end. Okay, hold on. Because it's also removing a sword. Let's stop it from removing a sword and just adding a sword. We're not going to add anything. Actually, that might give me an error. That probably will give me an error. Never mind, it didn't. Okay, cool. So it says, as you can see, our swords are displayed right here. Now, one thing I got feedback from the sandbox series was that we don't want to see the text if the item is not stackable anyway. What's the point? Doesn't make sense, right? So what I can just say is if slots, if items, right? Yeah, if items I dot get item, here we go. If items I dot get item dot is stackable, then display this. Otherwise, we're just going to display the same as if it was not even existing there, just like that. Okay. And for those wondering what the shortcuts I'm using, by the way, is if you hold Alt and up and down arrow, you can switch lines. Control D to obviously duplicate lines. If you click on a line and do Control D, it duplicates it entirely anyway. So just a few shortcuts there for those wondering, because I realize I'm using them a lot. So for those thinking, how am I coding so fast? Skills, bro. Nah. So let's press play. I forgot what I just did. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so on the non-stackable items, the number is now not appearing. Perfect. That is our user interface setup, guys. Now, one thing that we still have to add is the ability to drag and drop items. That's when it starts to get a little bit more confusing and complicated. So I just want to end this video here. If you guys did enjoy this video, this tutorial, let me know. Drop a like, subscribe, all this and that. Let me know on the Discord as well what you guys would want to see in the next tutorials. That said, I will be doing a part 2 to this, where we do add the ability to drag and drop items around in your inventory. That's when the fun stuff starts happening. So thanks for watching this one, guys. I will catch you in the next video. Take care and peace.